Welcome to FCLE Seminar about the Florida Civic Literacy Exam, a podcast where we unpack the nuts and bolts of democracy and shine a light on the moments that shaped it. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto, and today we're stepping into the Wayback Machine back to 1974 to talk about United States versus Nixon, a showdown between presidential power and the rule of law. Got it? Great. Let's get started. Landmark Supreme Court case number 18, the United States versus Nixon, 1974. Case background, let's set the scene. It's the early 1970s, and the United States is tangled up in a major political scandal called Watergate. What's that? Picture this. Journalists Woodward and Bernstein broke the news in a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters, Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. Now, back to the case. See, evidence had emerged that these shenanigans led all the way back to the White House, to President Richard Nixon, and to his closest aides, like the top advisors, for their roles in this scandalous affair. But here's where it gets really messy. There were audio tapes and documents, secret recordings from the Oval Office made by Nixon himself that might hold the key to what really happened. Yeah, I'm telling you. A subpoena, that's a legal order, was issued for the tapes and documents. See, get this. Nixon claimed he was immune from complying with the subpoena. After all, he was the president. His argument? Something called executive privilege. See, executive privilege is this idea that a president has the right to withhold information from other branches of the government to protect confidential communications in a separation of powers way. Okay, this is understandable. Actually, really. So the question with the Supreme Court becomes, is the president immune to judicial review when using executive privilege to safeguard confidential information? The court's decision. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled against Nixon and, quoting oyas.org here, quote, gave preference to the fundamental demands of due process of law in the fair administration of justice, end quote. Interpretation. The president is not above the law. It's like this. We get it. Presidents need some confidentiality to function, and executive privilege is real and necessary, in fact, vital, especially when it comes to military or diplomatic secrets. But it's not absolute. So the decision is clear. Nixon had to obey the subpoena and turn over tapes and documents. As a result, Nixon resigned from the presidency. The constitutional principle. The principle at play here is the Fifth Amendment's individual protections via the Due Process of Law Clause. The Fifth applies to the federal government, like in this case, but I also want to bring up the 14th Amendment, which extends similar protections against state actions, plus adds citizenship and equal protection under the law, like we saw in Engel versus Vitale, episode 11. Together, the Fifth and 14th Amendments are heavy hitters in the constitutional law. Now, we kind of touched base on the Fifth Amendment in Miranda versus Arizona, episode 23, where the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution states in a nutshell that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Whew, that's a lot. And you know what? You're doing great. You're going to nail this exam. Let's review. So why does United States versus Nixon matter to us today? It's a civics lesson with teeth. First, it's a reminder that no one, not even the president, is above the law. The Supreme Court flexed its muscle here, showing it can check the executive branch when push comes to shove. The balance of power? It's not just a theory. It's a living, breathing thing. So remember this. Number one, there are limits to executive privilege. The Supreme Court ruled that executive privilege is not absolute. While recognizing the importance of confidentiality within the executive branch, The court emphasized that it cannot be used to obstruct criminal justice proceedings. And number 2, rule of law. The decision reaffirmed that the principle that all individuals, including the president, are subject to the law. The court prioritized that thing we mentioned, fundamental demands of due process of law over the president's claim of executive privilege. In essence, United States versus Nixon is a landmark case that reinforced the principle of rule of law and established important limitations on executive power. Here's your takeaway challenge. Next time you hear about a big political scandal, ask yourself who's checking who. Dig a little deeper, maybe hit up a site like oyas.org or visit FCLEseminar.com. Share what you find with us. We're on Spotify and YouTube, and we love hearing from you. That's it for today's Civic Literacy Exam Prep. I'm Mercedes Musto, and I'll catch you next time when we dig into Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, 1978, another landmark case about, well, this one's about affirmative action. Until then, keep asking those big questions, and thanks for listening to FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can pass the FCLE.